Hi everybody, my name is Tammy Bryant, and right now I'm recording in my car at the top of a canyon. I am determined to finish this assignment and present it to you. The question that I chose was, how was the institution of slavery shaped by gender? And I'm using a PowerPoint to guide my discussion here. So bear with me, it's the first time I've done this. A little bit of history on the question. 2/3 of slaves were men. The number increased due to natural reproduction later on, which of course that means babies. Many people died on the slave ships, not necessarily during the slave trade itself, although we all know people perished during that time. There were many deaths on slave ships. I recall quite a while ago there was a movie, I can't remember right now what the name of that movie was called. We've all seen it, but they showed how awful it was for the people on the ships. They were holding babies up in the air and passing the babies along to keep them safe during the voyage overseas. The domestic slave trade came next, which we know as the slavery in America. It divided humanity into distinct races, but did not occur prior to slavery. Slavery created the modern categories of black and white. That was very interesting to me. I never thought of that, never questioned that. Labor exploitation was justified in gender and race. The novel Kindred that we've been reading was absolutely amazing. I started it before the semester even started. I thought it was interesting, the relationship between Alice Greenwood and Rufus, or Rufy, I think they pronounce it in the book. It was an interesting example of a forced relationship, and perhaps at one point there could have been love. It talked about in the book that one night Alice came to Rufy or Rufus on her own. They only mentioned that once, and eventually she took her own life. And this relationship would not have occurred if slavery were not in effect. I doubt she would have been attracted to Rufus at that time. And the sacred institution of sex was forced in a way that shaped the continued force of slavery, which was of course shaped by gender. Women were targets naturally, and we see this in the novel Kindred. The stereotypes of enslaved women. The Jezebel, I never really thoroughly understood what this meant. Enslaved women were said to be able to invite white men to engage in sexual activity, so perhaps they were said to lure the men. Enslaved black women were said to have insatiable appetites for sex. I think that still goes on today. It was used to justify the rape of a black woman, and of course this was very untrue. Black women did not have an insatiable appetite, and it should not have been used to justify the rape of black women or African American women. They mistook the nudity of Africans as lewdness. Their culture was not the same as the white European culture. Women were manhandled, as I call it, on the selling blocks and checked for ability to have children. The enslaved women, when they were on those blocks, wore tattered clothing. And this nurtured the thought of promiscuity. And of course, this is a good example of how gender shaped slavery. Women were taken advantage of, made fun of, looked down upon. The subject matter of procreation. Women were expected to reproduce. They were the property of their slave owner. Perhaps they were more important than men in a way, if we're speaking about gender and how that shaped slavery. They were expected to do the same work as men, but they also had the ability or responsibility in this case to bear children. So in a way they were more important, perhaps. They could do everything the men could do and more. The slave owners forced breeding, and that sounds like an animal the women were not animals, but it definitely sounds like they treated them that way. So once again, gender, being a woman, that definitely helped shape slavery, because women could have children, therefore that increased the profit of the slave owners. Next is the mammy. Very interesting. It's in a direct contrast to a Jezebel. Typically they were dark-skinned black women, and they worked on the plantation in the home. They were an expert on everything that was domestic: cooking, sewing, cleaning, being a wet nurse. I first learned about being a wet nurse from my mother. She taught me about that, so I always thought that was very intriguing as a young child. Couldn't quite understand it, but it was interesting nonetheless. White Southerners used this concept to validate that these enslaved women were content with their lot in life, which we learned was completely untrue. One little point of interest I thought about mammy: I work in the senior care industry, and one of my residents, who was in his 90s, he was not well, of course, and he was very dependent on his caregivers. One of his caregivers was a rather large woman. She had very dark skin. She was not African American, but to him perhaps she looked that way. And in his way, he would make fun of her, and he would call her mammy when he was irritated with her, and he would smile and laugh. But when he was irritated, he would call her mammy, and he would say, "Mammy, come here, mammy, come here." I don't think she understood where he was coming from with that, but I remember that. I thought that was not nice, but it was just interesting that he chose that word of all words. How slavery was shaped by gender. To end this discussion, if women did not have the ability to give pleasure to men, they would not have been targeted by the white slave owners. The fancy trade, which was a new term for me, it means that the white men, the slaveholders, would have sex with the black women, and then those women would be sold to the prostitution industry, and therefore slavery was shaped by gender. That is a slavery, I believe, in and of itself. So in that regard, also slavery was shaped by gender. If women did not have the ability to bear children, the slave owners would not be able to secure a large population of their slaves without having to go elsewhere for cheap labor. Again, this is slavery that was shaped by gender. Women were able to bear the children. The natural abilities that come from women enabled the concept of the mammy. Men did not typically do this work, although men did work in the households. The women, the mammies, took on the responsibilities of the white women, and in that way, slavery was shaped by gender. Amazing concepts from this chapter, and I appreciated all the new learning that I received, and I hope you enjoy my video post. Thank you.